to give them this truth, now they say I preach. I'm trying to give them this word, now they say I preach. I open up my book, now they say I preach it. They don't want to come around because they always say I'm preach. I'm trying to give them this truth, is what I'm trying to do. Man, I'm trying to save your soul, is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to open your eyes to what I'm trying to do. 144,000, don't you want to be counted too? Hey, Shock will take these Hebrews to another level.
Shalom, shalom, shalom. This is Abshaiyah of Israeliteway, and this is another Sharpen Your Sword lesson presentation study. It's entitled Understanding Passover, Yah's Way or Man's Way. In this lesson presentation study, I'll be using the Creator's name, which is Yahuwah, and the Messiah's name, Yahushua. In this lesson presentation study, I'll be reading from the translation called the Scriptures, and we don't put any scriptures above other translations. The main important thing is to have understanding. This is just another revealing of Yahweh's truth intended to bring his people out of erroneous teachings, to come full circle and back to him and his ways at the end of the age. Remember that his ways are higher than ours and beyond our understanding. His truth is in his word, and his word is settled in the heavens. Nevertheless, Yahuwah requires that we bear witness of his word, his ways, and his truth. Do not let previous learned doctrines keep you from discovering more and more of Yahuwah's ways and Yahuwah's point of view on this subject. Understanding Passover, Yah's way or man's way. This is another exciting study, presentation. I'm gonna have some agreements. I'm gonna have some disagreement, but that's understandable. Now, Passover, all the other days that we practice, or we used to practice, according to the scriptures. Today we call them by the wrong name. We call them feast days. And they're not feast days because feast days are just one of the components that's performed during these appointed times. And this is the appointed times is the proper name that we should be using to describe these days that was given to us by the Most High Yah. So by calling it feast days, it does not give us the proper and true understanding of what these days are all about, right? By calling it by its proper name, appointed times, right? Or in the Hebrew, moed, singular, and moedim, it gives us a direct understanding of what these days represents. Because these days represents prophetic events that have occurred in the past and prophetic events, that's going to happen in the future. So we have to understand what these days represent and the importance of calling these days by the proper name and not just call it feast days, because our ancestors never called them feast days. They call them by the proper name, which is moed, moedim in the Hebrew, right? The beginning of wisdom is calling things by their right names. So I just want to establish that before we move forward into this lesson, that these days are not feast days. They are appointed times. Yah's appointed times. Yah's appointment for prophetic events on the earth. Passover questions. I have 5 questions I'm going to present here before we move forward with this lesson presentation study. And these 5 questions, there is probably 1 or 2 answers to these questions. Because normally when you ask a question in regards to the Passover, why do you perform the Passover? The answer is normally that the scripture said we should do it for all generation. And that's true. We should do it for all generation. But if you're doing it for all generation, how do you perform it? How do you perform it according to the scriptures? Because the scriptures give us instructions on how these appointed times is supposed to be performed. So the first question is, what was the Passover in Egypt and how was it performed? Because many would say that the first Passover was in Egypt. So now, the Passover that was in Egypt, right? How was it performed when we were in Egypt? And what was the Passover? What was the Passover in Egypt and how was it performed? Right? The second question is, what was the Passover in the wilderness and how was it performed? Because when we're in the wilderness, we also, right, perform Passover, right? So what was the Passover in the wilderness and how was it performed, right? Third question is, what was the Passover when we were in our own land and how was it performed, right? How was it performed when we were in our own land and what was the Passover, right? According to the scriptures. The fourth question is, what was the Passover after Yahushua's death and resurrection and how was it performed? Because they still continue even after Yahushua's resurrection, right? They were still performing the Passover after his resurrection. So what was the Passover and how was it performed? Fifth question is, what was the Passover while we were in captivity outside our land and how was it performed according to the scriptures? Is there any evidence in scripture where we had Passover while we were in captivity outside of our land and how was it performed? So these 5 questions, as we go through this lesson presentation study, the answer is going to be given. And I hope you'll identify what the answer is, and there may be 1 or 2 answers to these questions. Well, you have some Israelites that teach that the Last Supper is a new covenant, and it's also the new Passover that we're supposed to perform. But is that accurate according to the scriptures? Is there anywhere in scriptures where the Messiah, even Yahushua himself, says this is the new Passover, right? The way the Passover was done before it has been abolished, it has been repealed, and now this is the new Passover that we break bread and drink wine. So a lot of folks insist that this is a new Passover and this is a new covenant. The breaking of bread was thus associated with the prayer of thanksgiving and had a righteous significance of joint fellowship in sharing and enjoying the blessings of Yahweh. It is clear that after the resurrection of Yahushua, the disciples began to meet together in fellowship assemblies and that they shared meals together. After Yahushua's ascension and the events of the day of Pentecost, the disciples continued their fellowship together. Their common meals would now also be conscious remembrance of the meal they had shared with Yahushua during his physical presence among them. And as they broke bread and gave thanks, they would be reminded of the times he did this in their midst, and they would be conscious of his continued presence with them through this set-apart spirit. So this is what it was all about. It was about breaking bread and drinking wine in remembrance of Yahushua, right? The joint fellowship that they had with him. So that's what Yahushua told them, as often as you can, when they get together, and they fellowship with each other, you break bread and you drink wine. So this is not no new covenant, and this is not no new Passover that we're instructed to keep for all generations. The Moedim are the appointed times. Moedim is the Hebrew, and English is appointed times, right? So these appointed times represents prophetic events that have occurred in the past, and also prophetic event that's gonna take place in the future. So these 7 moeds we're gonna look at in this presentation, but we're going to focus more so on the Passover, which is the first Moed. First Moed, the Passover, Yahushua's death and resurrection as the Passover lamb. So he was sacrificed for the remission of our transgression. So the Passover is the event of sacrificing a lamb, right? So without a lamb, there's no Passover, right? So you cannot have Passover without a lamb, because the lamb is the Passover, right? The second Moed is the unleavened bread, which was Yahushua's burial as bread of life. So that's the fulfillment right there, when Yahushua was buried as the bread of life. The third Moed, first fruits, Yahushua's resurrection, right? So that third Moed was fulfilled at Yahushua's resurrection. Fourth Moed, weeks, Pentecost, Yahushua's outpouring of the Ruach HaKodesh, the set apart spirit. On that day, that fourth Moed, that's when that fourth Moed was fulfilled. The fifth Moed, right? It's future, the trumpets. The latter days, Yahushua called to repentance as watchkeeper. So the trumpets are being sounded in these last days for us to repent of our transgression, because our redemption draw nigh. So the sixth Moed is atonement, right? Yahushua's return as Redeemer, gathering of Israel and judgment of the world, and a regathering of Israel. So this Day of Atonement is future, and it's going to occur when Yahushua is going to regather Israel and judge the world. So the seventh Moed, tabernacles, right? Yahushua's millennial reign as king. That's what tabernacles, future, can be fulfilled when Yahushua return to rule and reign as king. So the big question is, why are we not performing the Moedim as a nation today, just like our ancestors? And the reason why, because of the Most High's anger, right? The Most High was angry with our ancestors because of their disobedience, and them doing all sort of abomination and following after all sort of different types of gods, building up statues and altars and making all sort of sacrifice and an abomination. And this is what angered the Most High, and that's why he took these days away from us, right? He took those things that which are available to us in order for us to perform these days according to how he instructs us to do it. So that's why we're not able to perform it according to how he instructs us to do it, according to his way, right? Today, a lot of Israelites are overzealous in order to perform these days, so they proceed in doing it their way and not doing it Yah's way. And that's wrong, because the Most High give us instructions and tell us how we're supposed to do it and how we're supposed to perform these Moedims. So we can recognize it today, we can acknowledge it, but to perform it our way, we're still doing the same wrong that our ancestors did, right? And we're prolonging the punishment that the Most High has placed upon us by performing our own way. We have to do it Yah's way, not man's way. So Matthew 24 verse 1 says, "And going out, Yahushua went away from the set apart place, and his taught ones came near to point out to him the buildings of the set apart place." Matthew 24 verse 2, "And Yahushua said to them, Do you not see all these? Truly I say to you, not one stone shall be left there upon another at all, which shall not be thrown down." So Israel knew exactly what's going to happen with this temple, because this is where the Passover was being performed, right? The Passover is the event of sacrificing a lamb, right? And we're instructed to come to Jerusalem in order to perform the Passover, which is the event of sacrificing a lamb, right? So Yeshua knows that this is going to, in the future, we're no longer going to be able to come to Jerusalem to perform the Passover, which is the event of sacrificing a lamb, because we're going to do some things that's going to make the Most High upset, going to anger the Most High, and he's going to take away these things that are available to us, so we cannot come up to Jerusalem in order to perform these appointed times, right? 1 Kings 9 verse 7 says, Then I shall cut off Israel from the face of the soil which I have given them, and send away from my presence this house which I have set apart for my name. And Israel shall be a proverb and a mockery among all the peoples. So it says, my presence, this house which I have set apart for my name, which is Jerusalem. Right? So it's going to cut us off. It's going to send us away from the land so that we're not able to come up to Jerusalem in order to perform the Passover, which is the event of sacrifice on the lamb. Right? So Romans 11 verse 11 says, And I say then, have they stumbled that they shall fall? Let it not be, but their fall deliverance has come to the nations to provoke them to jealousy. So the Most High have transferred the wealth from us over to the other nation in order to provoke us to jealousy because of our disobedience. Right? Because of our disobedience, we're no longer the head, but now we are the tail. Right? Romans 11 verse 12. And if their fall is riches for the world and their failure riches for the nations, how much more their completeness? So this is why we see that we're not wealthy as we ought to be, because the Most High, He has allowed this to happen. He has allowed the transfer of wealth from us over to the other nations, and that's why we're in the situation that we're in today, because of our disobedience. We want to do things our way and not as opposed to doing it Yah's way. Jeremiah 17 verse 4 says, And thou, even thyself, shalt discontinue from thine heritage that I gave thee. I will cause thee to serve thine enemies in the land which thou knowest not, for ye have kindled a fire in mine anger, which shall burn forever. So the Most High said, yeah, we shall discontinue from our heritage. All these moedim that we used to practice, we're getting discontinued from it. Right? We're no longer going to perform it the way He had instructed us to perform it. It's going to be all forgotten. Right? It's going to all cease, and we're no longer going to be doing it according to how we used to do it back when we were in our land. So Lamentation 2 verse 6 says, He has demolished his booth like a garden. He has destroyed his place of meeting. Yahuwah has made the appointed times and Sabbath to be forgotten in Zion, and despises sovereign and priests in his raging displeasure, because we have angered the Most High so much because of our disobedience. So the Most High have taken these things away from us as punishment. He is the one that has caused it, to cease, and because of that, now Israelites, right, are trying to find a way back, trying to find the right day and the right month, and it's only a guesswork now. It's all assumed. Everybody's assuming what day it should be, right? What month it should be, right? Some people are using all different type of calendar to try to figure out what is the exact date, and the Most High and instruct us in order to perform these appointment times that is Moedim. But the Most High said, I took it away from you. I caused it to stop, right? I caused you to forget these days, right? Why did I do it? Because you're disobedient, because of your the things that you were doing, that caused me to say that, Israel, I'm going to put you on punishment. I'm going to send you into the land of your enemies, and you're no longer going to be able to perform these days, because whatever is available to you is no longer going to be available. So you cannot come to Jerusalem to perform the Passover no more, as the Passover is the event of sacrifice of the lamb. All is going to be taken away from you. Everything that you need in order to perform these appointed time is going to be taken away from you. And Yah does not take pleasure in you doing it your way. You have to perform it Yah's way. His way is the only way, right? You go ahead and start to perform it your way, right? The Most High is going to hold you accountable for it. Do not perform it your way or man's way, right? Or any other way somebody come and try to encourage you to do it, because the scripture says you should do it for all generations. So if you're doing it for all generations, how do you perform it for all generations according to Yah's way? That's the question that you have to ask yourself. How do I perform it according to Yah's way? Exodus 5 verse 1 says, And afterwards Moshe and Aaron went in and said to Pharaoh, Thus say Yahuwah Adonai Yisrael, Let my people go, so that they keep a festival to me in the wilderness. So the key word here is festival. Why they don't want to keep a festival in the wilderness? Because this is what a free nation does, right? When you have a festival, it's about celebration, right? It's about joy, it's about happiness, it's about cultural, right? Now that's what a festival is all about. So the definition of a festival is an occasion for feasting or celebration, and often a regularly or recurring program of cultural performances, exhibitions, or competition, a periodic commemoration, anniversary, or celebration, a period or program of festive activities, cultural events, or entertainment. Right? So this is what Moses, want us to be able to enjoy as a free nation, not in captivity in Egypt. Because we in captivity in Egypt, you cannot have a festival there, right? You can have a cultural performance and program and so forth when you've been inflicted punishment and hardship and hard work and hard labor, and you do this from sun up until sundown, day and night. How can you celebrate, right? How can you have a festival? Just like today, how can you practice these moed and moedim in the condition that our people are in? This is a time of mourning. Our people are getting shot down in the street. We're still being brutalized. Racism here and there, hardship wherever we go, and yet people want to celebrate by having festivals, right? Passovers, feast days, all these different things people want to do, and you look at the condition of our people, right? We're now in a state of mourning, right? Not time to be festive and have festival. It's time to mourn, right? For our people, for the condition that we're in, right? So, Moedim, first Moedim, which includes the Passover and the unleavened bread, right? It includes a celebration, because the celebration was the fact that we're in Egypt and we're now free from the bondage and the infliction and the hardship, on the fair in Egypt, and now it's cause for a celebration. It's cause for a celebration within that first Moed, right? And also we have the Passover, which is the event of sacrificing a lamb, and we also have feasts. Feasting include having a lot of food, right? That's what feast is. Feast is about having food, a lot of food, where we can eat and enjoy yourself and just have a good time, right? That's the reason. That was the reason and the purpose for the first Moed, the first Moedim, and also includes this event of sacrificing a lamb, which is a representation of Joshua being a sacrificial lamb for the redemption of our transgression. So Matthew 27 verse 15 says, "And at the festival the governor used to release to the crowd one prisoner whom they wished." So the governor at that time, decided to do us a solid and release a prison, because the understanding was that it was such a grand occasion. It was a huge festival during this time when we celebrate the first Moed. And we have Israelites that come from all over the place, like millions of Israelites that traveled to Jerusalem in order to participate in this festive occasion, because this festival was also not only the event of sacrificing a lamb, which is the Passover, but also was a time for us to celebrate freedom from Egyptian bondage. So Matthew 27 verse 62, "And on the next day, which was after the preparation, the chief priests and Pharisees gathered together." Mark 14 verse 1 and 2 says, "After 2 days was the festival of the Passover and of the unleavened bread." So these two occasions, right, was part of the festival. They were called a festival. So these things were performed during the time of the festival. That first Moed is a festival, right? It was not a religious occasion, and that's how a lot of people approach it, as though it's some kind of religious occasion. That's not what it is. It's supposed to be performed as a festival, right? And the Passover is the event of sacrificing the lamb. And the chief priests and the scribes sought out how they may take him by craft and put him to death. But they said, "Not on the feast day, lest there be an uproar of the people." Right? Mark 14 verse 12 and 16. And the first day of the unleavened bread, when they kill the Passover, what are they killing? The Passover, which is what? The lamb. So what are you killing? You're killing something, which is the Passover. So the lamb is the Passover. His disciples said unto him, where wilt thou be? Go and prepare that you mayest eat the Passover. So if you're eating something, what are you eating? The lamb. That's why they call the lamb is the Passover. Right? So that whole event where the slaughtering of the lamb is called a Passover. So the Passover is the event of sacrificing a lamb. And he sendeth forth two of his disciples and said unto them, go ye into the city, and there shall meet you a man bearing a pitcher of water. Follow him. And wheresoever ye shall go in, say he to the good man of the house, the master said, where is the guest chamber, where I shall eat the Passover, which is the lamb. You're eating the lamb, so the lamb is called the Passover, right? You either call it the lamb or you call it the Passover, right? So the lamb is the Passover, right? That's what the Passover is. The Passover is the lamb. The Passover is not the occasion. It's not the event, celebration. The Passover, the lamb is the Passover. And he will shew you a large upper room, furnished and prepared, there make ready for us. And the disciples went forth and came into the city and found as he had said unto them, and they made ready the Passover, the lamb. So they got the lamb and they made it ready for it to be slaughtered. So the lamb is the Passover, right? Not the appointed time is the Passover. The Passover is the lamb, right? That's what the Passover is. It's the lamb. So this is a model, sort of kind of give us an idea what it was like during the time of the festival when we traveled to Jerusalem during the first Moed, which is the festival of the Passover and the festival of the unleavened bread. So we see different sections here where the feast we have feasts which is performed, which is fellowship, having meal with the family, and sharing what you've prepared, and just eat and just have a good time. And you have the Passover, which was done in the temple in Jerusalem. There, the event of sacrificing a lamb, which is the Passover, and that's what the Passover is. It's the event of sacrificing a lamb, because the lamb that was set apart or prepared at that time was called the Passover lamb, right? And that lamb was called a Passover, and that was that's the lamb that was sacrificed during this first Moed. And other activities that went along there, Hebrews, when we have these festivals, we go all out, we always have a great time, we're talented people, and we go and we do all sorts of different activities and all sorts of different performances. So I'm going to play these next two videos. This is in Nigeria. They had a festival of unleavened bread, and let's take a look at these videos, kind of give us an idea how we perform these festivals during the appointed times. Well, I hope this is beginning to make a lot of sense to a lot of people, but we're still gonna have a few scoffers out there because we're not supposed to perform this Moedim like a religious ceremony. That's not how we're instructed to do it. It's supposed to be performed as a festival. Because in the King James translation and other translation, you'll see the word feast, and feast is just a substitution. It's a substitution for the word festival. That's the word that should have been there in the translation, and that's what's thrown off the understanding when it comes to these Moedim. So, Exodus 12 verse 1 says, "And this is how you eat it. Your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it in haste. It is the Passover of Yahuwah." So what are you eating in haste? The lamb, right? And what is that lamb? It's a Passover. It's the Passover of Yahuwah, and that is what you're eating. You're eating Yahuwah's Passover. Verse 12, "And I shall pass through the land of Mizraim, and on that night, and shall smite all the firstborn in the land of Mizraim, both man and beast, and all the mighty ones of Mizraim I shall execute judgment. I am Yahuwah." So if you don't have that Passover blood on your doorpost, the angel is not going to pass over your house. So that's where we get the word Passover, because the angel passed over the house. And the reason why they pass over our houses is because of the blood from that lamb. It's the blood from that Passover, and that's why it's called a Passover, because the lamb is the Passover. Because if there was no lamb and there was no blood, then the angel would not pass over your house. They would stop and slaughter the firstborn of your household. So that's why the Passover is, and the lamb goes hand in hand. So the Passover is the lamb, and the lamb is the Passover. Exodus 12 verse 13, And the blood shall be a sign for you in the house where you are. And when I see the blood, I shall pass over you, and let the plague not come on you to destroy you when I smite the land of Mizraim. Exodus 12 verse 14. And this day shall become to you a remembrance, and you shall observe it as a festival. You shall observe it as a what? Festival. As a festival to Yahweh throughout your generation, and observe it as a festival and everlasting law. So this is where a lot of people tripped up, and the only thing that they focus on is through your generations, right? Through your generations, right? And everlasting law. But through your generation is not the law. The law is to observe it as a festival. So if you not observe it as a festival, you are transgressing the law. So this verse we just read is a very important verse. Do not skip over any words within that verse, right? Because a lot of people skip over words and they jump to throughout your generation and everlasting law, right? When the verse said you should do it as a festival throughout your generation. So don't skip over any keywords that kind of give us an indication and give us an instruction on how it's supposed to be performed as a festival throughout your generation and everlasting law. So Exodus 12 verse 16 says, and on the first day is a set apart gathering, and on the seventh day you have a set apart gathering. No work at all is done on them, only that which is eaten by every being, that alone is prepared by you. So this Moedim, this Moed, we have two Sabbaths. The first day is the Sabbath, and the last day, the seventh day of this Moedim is a Sabbath. And you know, the Sabbath is a high Sabbath, so it's observed for 24 hours, from sunset till sunset the next day. So Exodus 12 verse 17, and you shall guard the festival of unleavened bread, for on this same day I brought your division out of the land of Mizraim. And you shall guard this day throughout your generation, and everlasting law. You're supposed to guard this day, and you should be doing it exactly the same way every single year, right? Not somebody over here doing it this and somebody over here doing it that way. No, that's not how it's supposed to be done. You should be doing it the same way all the time. When you guard something, you guard it so that no one comes and tamper with it, right? No one comes and make changes to it, right? That's when you guard something, you preserve it, right? So you could pass it on throughout your generation. Exodus 12 verse 23, and Yahweh shall pass on to smite the Mizrahites, and shall see the blood on the lintel and on the doorposts, and on the two doorposts. And Yahweh shall pass over the door and not allow the destroyer to come into your house to smite you. Exodus 12 verse 24. And you shall guard this word as a law for you and your sons forever. Right? So when you guard something, you make sure nobody comes and tamper with it. Right? And make any changes to it. Right? It should be done exactly the same way throughout your generation. Exodus 12 verse 25. And it shall be when you come to the land which Yahweh gives you, as he promised, that you shall guard this service. So when you come into the land, you're supposed to be performing exactly the same way. Right? Exodus 12 verse 26. And it shall be when your children say to you, what does this service mean to you? Because you perform it the exact same way, and the kids want to know. So, so you can pass it on to the next generation, right? So that they preserve it and they perform it exactly the same way. So this is preserve your heritage, you preserve your culture, and you preserve your history, right? By passing on to the next generation, and that's why you guard it so it's done exactly the same way every year. So Exodus 12 verse 27. Then you shall say, it is the Passover slaughtering of Yahuwah, who passed over the house of the children of Israel in Mizraim, when he smote the Mizrahites and delivered our household, and the people bowed their heads and did obeisance. So when you slaughtering the Passover, right? They may come and ask you, why are we slaughtering the lamb? Why are we slaughtering the Passover? Then you can explain to them, right? Why are we doing it? So even today, we should still be performing the same thing. Right? But we can't perform it today because of the fact that we're no longer in the land. We don't have access right, to be able to perform this thing. And that's why the scripture says we shall discontinue from a heritage. So we discontinue from a heritage, and now our generation do not know about our culture, our heritage, right? Our past history, because we have discontinued from a heritage. We don't do these things that we were doing back in the days when we were in our land, and we do not guard it anymore. So it's not being guarded anymore, and that's why we're in the situation that we're in now, where we have people doing it where it's all over the place, right? Some people doing it here, some people doing it there, some people doing it by themselves in their house, right? I mean, like, it's one big mess right now, because it was not guarded, and the Most High took it away from us, and now we have discontinued from the heritage, and we are just guessing now. Right now it's a whole bunch of guesswork. Okay? Exodus 12 verse 28. And the children of Israel went away and did so as Yahweh had commanded Moshe and Aaron, so they did. Right? They did exactly as Yahweh had commanded. They did not do it Moses' way. They did not do it Aaron's way. They did it Yah's way. So then now, should we just forget about these appointed times and, just treat every day, alike? And the answer is no. We can still recognize these days, but we have to understand that if we're going to perform it, we have to perform it Yah's way according to His law, right? Not just perform it any which way that we see fit, there's a way that seems right to a man, but it leads to destruction, right? So we have to be mindful of how we perform it, and we have to acknowledge it. We can respect it, we can recognize it, but if we're going to perform it, we have to make sure we perform it according to the law that governs the appointed times, right? So obedience is a key to understanding Yahweh's appointed time, right? When looking at Yahweh's appointed times, 5 things come to mind, right? Respect, right? Consideration or appreciation, right? So we don't totally forget about these appointed times, as if though they never exist, right? We can still respect them. Like I said, if you're going to perform it, make sure you perform it exactly as how Yah instructed according to His law, right? So observance, take notice, to become aware of, right? Acknowledge, to recognize, express appreciation, right? Recognize, to know or identify from past experience, right? Perform, to take action in accordance with the requirements to function or accomplish something as expected or required, right? So that's what I say, when we perform it, it has to be according to how Yah instructed it, and we have to perform it according to the law that governs the appointed times. So the festival was not given as a law, right? The laws, commands, and instructions were given by the Most High Yah to govern how to perform the festivals. So the way we perform it, right? We have to do it according to a particular law that Yah set as how it's supposed to be done, right? That's how it's supposed to be performed. We can't perform it any other way outside of Yah's law, because if we perform it outside the law that governs, right, the Moedim, then we are transgressing against the Most High. So the Passover is the event of slaughtering the lamb, right? That's what the Passover is. People call the day a Passover, but the day is not the Passover. The day is called an appointed time, right? But the Passover is the lamb. The Passover is the event of sacrificing a lamb. So if you don't have a lamb, you can't be performing a Passover, because you need the lamb in order to perform the Passover, because the lamb is the Passover. So a lot of people say, well, Yoshua is our Passover lamb. So that means, what are you performing then? Right? What are you performing? What are you performing if there's no Passover? Right? So there has to be a lamb, there has to be a sacrifice, and that sacrifice has to be done in Jerusalem, and that's the law. The law said the sacrifice have to be done in Jerusalem, and they have to be a lamb of the first year without blemish. That is the law. That's how you perform the Passover, which is the event of sacrificing a lamb. So the festival was an event ordained by Yah for the children of Israel to commemorate our freedom from Egyptian bondage, right? The Passover is not a feast day. The Passover is the event of sacrificing a lamb or goat and preparing it for the feast of unleavened bread. The Passover is not a high Sabbath day. The first and the last day of the feast of unleavened bread are high Sabbath days. A high Sabbath is a Sabbath other than the 7-day weekly Sabbath. Yah says the Passover lamb or goat used must be of the first year, a year old, and be without spot or blemish. To sacrifice an all-white lamb or goat for Passover, this means there must not be one black, red, or yellow hair or one cut or bruise found on the sacrifice. Otherwise, it cannot be used for the Passover. The Passover Exodus 12 was done in the wilderness as the Israelites were freed from bondage. However, Yah told them that once they entered the land, they could only keep the appointed times at the place he chose to place his name. This applies not only to the Passover, but also to the burnt offerings, food, tithes, vows, etc. All these things are to be done in the place Yah chose to place his name. So Deuteronomy 16 verse 16 says, 3 times a year all our males appear before Yahweh, your Elohim, in the place where he chooses, at the festival of unleavened bread, at the festival of weeks, and at the festival of booths. 2 Chronicles 6 verse 6, but I have chosen Jerusalem, for my name to be there. I have chosen David to be over my people Israel. So the Most High have chosen Jerusalem for his name to be there. There's nowhere in Scripture where he had made any where it has been repealed at any point, right? Altered in any way. Jerusalem is still the place where Yah chose for his name to be there. And Deuteronomy 16 verse 16, who's doing this today? Right? 3 times a year, all your males appear before Yahweh your Elohim in the place where he chooses. Is this being done today? Right? A lot of people like to run with it shall be done for all generation, but whatever, but all the other things that we're supposed to perform and do in these appointed times is totally ignored. Right? It's totally ignored. So we have to bear in mind that we have to perform these things according to how Yah instructed, not according to how we see fit, according to our own understanding of how we feel it should be done. Right? It should be done according to Yah, how Yah instructs us to perform it. Jubilees 46 verse 14. For this reason, Yahweh commanded the children of Israel to observe the Passover on the day of its fixed time. So it has to be done at a fixed time. Not somebody doing over here this day, somebody doing over there in that day. It has to be done on the fixed time, the exact day, exact fixed time is supposed to be performed. And they shall not break a bone thereof, for it is a festival and a day commanded. There may be no passing over from day to day and month to month, but on the day of its festival let it be observed. So it has to be observed on a fixed time. Just like when they were leaving Egypt, everybody had to perform the Passover at the exact same fixed time, right? And putting the blood on the doorpost at the same fixed time. Nobody was doing it a day before, and nobody was doing it a day after. They was doing it exactly on the exact same day. Everybody in one accord, doing it at the same time, right? Not debating on which day should be and which day this other group is doing it, debate how this other group is doing it, right? And the time and the month and how it's been done, right? If you look into the scripture and read how Yah instructed how it's to be done, we should be at one accord if we do it exactly as how Yah instructs us. Jubilees 46 verse 15. And do you command the children of Israel to observe the Passover through their days, every year, once a year, on the day of its fixed time. And it shall come for a memorial well-pleasing before Yahweh. So it has to be pleasing before Yahweh. So what you're doing, is it pleasing to him? Are you 100% certain that you have the exact same date? Or you just assume you do? Right? If you're off 1 or 2 days, right, it's not pleasing to the Most High. It has to be on that exact fixed date. Right? So if you don't know what date it is, don't say you're going to perform something. Might just leave it alone. And just leave it neutral. right? The Most High rather you not tamper with his fixed date. Might as well you just stay neutral. You rather you stay neutral than try to claim that you know exactly what that date is, right? And no plague shall come upon them to slay or to smite in the year in which they celebrate the Passover in the season in every respect according to his command. Right? Jubilees 46 verse 16. And they shall eat it outside the sanctuary of Yahuwah, but before the sanctuary of Yahuwah, and all the people of the congregation of Israel shall celebrate it in its appointed seasons. Right? So is anybody doing that? Eating it outside the sanctuary of Yahuwah? Right? Who's doing that today? Right? Verse 17. And every man who has come upon his day shall eat it in the sanctuary of our Almighty before Yahuwah from 20 years old and upward, for thus it is written and ordained that they should eat it in the sanctuary of Yahuwah. Are we doing that today? It is written and ordained that they should eat it. What are they eating? The Passover in the sanctuary of Yahuwah. Who's doing that today? Who is doing that today? Jubilees 46 verse 18. And when the children of Israel come into the land which they are to possess, into the land of Canaan, and set up the tabernacle of Yahuwah in the midst of the land in one of their tribes, until the sanctuary of Yahuwah has been built in the land, let them come and celebrate the Passover in the midst of the tabernacle of Yahuwah, and let them slay it before Yahuwah from year to year. They're supposed to slay it from year to year. When was that? When did that stop? When did the Most High say stop doing it? Right? Don't assume because Yahushua was a Passover lamb that it stopped there. Most High didn't say it stopped. Right? The Passover is the event of sacrificing a lamb. If you're going to perform a Passover, Passover means lamb sacrifice. Right? That's what it means. Lamb sacrifice is what Passover is. Jubilees 46 verse 19. And in the days when the house has been built in the name of Yahuwah in the land of their inheritance, they shall go there and slay the Passover in the evening and at sunset and at the third part of the day. Who is doing this today? Right? That's the most what the Most High instruct us to do it. That's how it's supposed to be done. Right? Who is doing that today? If you're not doing it, if you're saying you're performing it and you're not doing this, that means you're transgressing. Right? It's supposed to be done exactly like this. Right? Jubilees 46 verse 20. And they shall offer its blood on the threshold of the altar, and shall place its fat on the fire which is upon the altar, and they shall eat its flesh roasted with fire in the court of the house which has been sanctified in the name of Yahuwah. That's how it's supposed to be performed. Who is doing this today? Okay. Jubilees 46 verse 21. And they may not celebrate the Passover in their cities. Hear this? They may not celebrate the Passover in their cities, nor in any place save before the tabernacle of Yahuwah, or before his house where his name was dwelt, and they shall not go astray from Yahuwah. Right. Verse 22. And do you, Moshe, commanded the children of Israel to observe the ordinance of the Passover as it was commanded to you, declare you unto them every year and the day and its days, and the festival of unleavened bread, that they shall eat unleavened bread 7 days, and that they should observe its festival, and that they bring an oblation every day during these 7 days of joy before Yahuwah on the altar of Yahuwah your Almighty. Are they doing this? Are we doing this today? And we're running around saying we're performing Passover. Right? This is how it's supposed to be performed. Right? Everybody's running around saying, we're doing Passover today. That ain't Passover. Are you sacrificing a lamb? Passover is the event of sacrificing a lamb. Are you doing it your way? Are you doing it Yah's way? Right? Yah has chosen Jerusalem as a place to put his name. He told us to keep the appointed time in the place he chooses, along with unleavened bread, feast of weeks, right, and tabernacle. Yah tells us not to sacrifice the Passover in any of our gates, but only to do it in Jerusalem, because the Passover is the lamb. Right? Deuteronomy 16 verse 5. You are not allowed to slaughter the Passover within any of your gates, which Yahweh your Elohim gives you. Verse 6, Deuteronomy 16, verse 6. But at the place where Yahweh your alone chooses to make his name dwell, there you slaughter the Passover in the evening at the going down of the sun at the appointed time you come out of Mizrahim. Right? So you slaughter in the Passover. What is this Passover? Lamb. The Passover is a lamb. Not the day. The Passover is not the day. The Passover is a lamb. So a lot of people get it confused and call the day the Passover. The day is not the Passover. The lamb is the Passover, according to the word. Okay? 2 Chronicles 7 verse 16. And now I have chosen and set this house apart for my name to be there. How long? Forever. How long? Forever. And my eyes and my heart shall always be there. Forever. Right? Forever he has chosen Jerusalem. 2 Chronicles 3 verse 1. And Hezekiah sent to all Israel and Yehuda, and he also wrote letters to Ephraim and Manasseh, to come to the house of Yahweh at Jerusalem to perform the Passover to Yahweh or Elohim of Israel. So he sent a letter to them and said, hey, you have to come to Jerusalem to perform this Passover. Right? He didn't send them a letter and say, hey, make sure you perform the Passover wherever you're at. Right? He told them you have to come to Jerusalem to perform the Passover because that is the law. That is Yah's law. That you have to come to Jerusalem. Right? 2 Chronicles 30 verse 2. But the sovereign and his elders and all the assembly in Jerusalem had taken counsel to perform the Passover in the second month. Right? Because they were not ready to do it the first time around, but in the second month they were able to come and do it. Because Passover, the event of sacrifice of lamb, if you missed the first one, you could catch it up on the second one. 2 Chronicles 30 verse 3. For they were unable to perform it at this time because not enough priests had set themselves apart, and the people had not gathered at Jerusalem. So they had not gathered at Jerusalem, so that's why they couldn't perform it. So why are people performing it outside of Jerusalem? When the Most High said it has to be done in Jerusalem. Which laws are you following? Which books are you following? Which man are you following? Right? The Most High said it has to be performed in Jerusalem. 2 Chronicles 30 verse 13. And many people, a very great assembly, gathered at Jerusalem to perform the festival of unleavened bread in the second month. Right? So even though they missed it the first month, the second month, they made sure they come to Jerusalem. Because they cannot do it anywhere outside of Jerusalem. They cannot perform the event of sacrifice on the lamb and the festival outside of Jerusalem. You have to come to Jerusalem. That is the law. Verse 15. 2 Chronicles 30 verse 15. Then they slaughtered the Passover. What did they slaughter? The lamb. Because the lamb is the Passover. So they slaughtered the lamb, the Passover, on the 14th day of the second month. And the priests and the Levites were ashamed and set themselves apart and brought the burnt offerings to the house of Yahuwah. Second Chronicles 30 verse 21. And the children of Israel who were in Jerusalem performed the festival of unleavened bread 7 days with great joy. And the Levites and the priests praised Yahuwah day by day with instruments of praise before Yahuwah. Because it was a festival. So they were having a grand time. Right? It was not no religious ceremony. Right? When you have a religious ceremony, there's no grand time going on and festive activities being performed. This is a festival. They're performing it as a festival, not a holy religious ceremony. 2 Chronicles 30 verse 25. And all the assemblies of Yehuda rejoiced, and the priests and the Levites, and all the assemblies who had come from Israel, and the sojourners who came from the land of Israel, and those who dwelt in Yehuda. So even had strangers who came to participate in this festival. 2 Chronicles 30 verse 26. And there came to be a great joy in Jerusalem, for since the days of Shlomo, son of David, the sovereign of Israel, be like of this had not been in Jerusalem. So it was such a grand festive event. Everybody had a great time, right? They said we have never had such a great time since Solomon, right? The son of David, right? So they had a great time. It was the best festival ever. 2 Chronicles 30 verse 27. And the priests, the Levites, rose and blessed the people, and their voices was heard, and their prayer came up to his set apart dwelling place to heaven. So Yahushua celebrated Passover in Jerusalem just as the law states. So even Yahushua himself obeyed the law. Right? Luke 2 verse 41. And his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the festival of the Passover. So they go to the festival every single year. Where? In Jerusalem. Right? In Jerusalem. That's where they went because that was the law. Right? And the law has not changed and it has not been repealed. Right? Luke 2 verse 41. And when he was 12 years old, they went up to Jerusalem according to the practice of the festival. Remember? They said we have to guard it. So they've been guarding each and every year, and they continue to do it exactly the same way year after year, right? The festival has been practiced, in Jerusalem the same way according to, how they've been doing it for generations, right? So it was done in Jerusalem according to the practice of the festival. So Luke 2 verse 43. And when they had accomplished the days as they returned, the child Yahushua stayed behind in Jerusalem, and his parents did not know. So Passover is not a feast, it's the sacrificing of the lamb. Calling Passover a feast is a mistake. Next it says his parents, Miriam and Joseph, went to Jerusalem every year to keep the Passover. It was their custom to go to Jerusalem every year for the Passover. According to verse 43, it says, after they had fulfilled the days, then they left Jerusalem. There are those who claim the sacrifices ended, but the feast days did not. Right? There's, of course, no scripture that can be produced that specifically says the sacrifices are gone, but the feasts remain. There's no such scripture. This is just an assumption. People making all sort of excuse in order to perform the festival according to how they see fit, right? And they'll say Yahushua is our sacrificial lamb as an excuse, and they say, oh, my body is a temple, right? So we don't have to go to Jerusalem no more, right? That is so rebellious. That's just the rebellious excuses that people use so they could perform these appointed times according their way and not Yah's way. So in fact, Yahuwah says these feasts are His. They're not feasts of the Israelites or of anyone else. They are Yah's appointed times. So those are Yah's appointed times, so we do not alter it in any way. Right? Something that belongs to someone, you respect it. Right? You don't want to tamper with somebody else's property. These are Yah's property. So we do not tamper with it in any way. Right? So the word feast is translated from the Hebrew word moed, which means appointment. Right? Matthew 5 verse 17 says, do not think that I come to destroy the Torah or the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to complete. So Yahushua said he did not come to destroy anything. Even the laws that govern the appointed time, he did not come to destroy it. Right? He did not come to destroy. He come to complete those prophecies that have been said about him. Right? And restore Israel back in its proper place. Right? That's what he came to fulfill. He did not come to destroy any law. So all the laws that govern the appointed times are still in place. Right? Nothing has been repealed. Matthew 5 verse 18, for truly I say to you, till the heaven and the earth has passed away, not one jot or one tittle shall by no means pass from the Torah till all be done. Is all be done yet? No. Right? Anybody says that, oh, we don't have to sacrifice lamb anymore, stuff like that, that is the law. That law hasn't been fulfilled. That hasn't been abolished. Right? It's still there. It hasn't been abolished. Matthew 5 verse 19 says, whoever then breaks one of the least of these commands and teaches men so shall be called least in the reign of the heavens. But whoever does and teaches them, he shall be called great in the reign of heaven. So if you go around and telling people, oh, we don't have to sacrifice no more, hey, you're breaking law. You're gonna be called, they're calling you least. Hey, you don't want the heavenly host to be up there saying you're least because you're telling man they don't have to keep this law anymore. They don't have to keep that law anymore. Right? You better be careful what you speak from your mouth, which is not validated by scriptures. Right? The scripture says none of the law has been destroyed. Right? Yahweh's plan for salvation is shown by the 7 Moedim. The appointed times are shadows of things to come, which point to Yahushua's first and second coming. So while most Hebrew Israelites still celebrate the feast, it's unfortunate that many don't understand Yahushua's fulfillment of them and thus miss the Messiah that was sent for their salvation. It's clear to see that the appointed times symbolized Yahushua's work, and to better understand and praise Yahuwah and rejoice in his plans for the salvation of the righteous. So Yahushua is our Passover lamb. The days of unleavened bread represents our new pure life as we strive to remove sin from our lives. The first spring festival described the first coming of Yahushua. He was sacrificed on the festival of the Passover, was buried on the festival of unleavened bread, was resurrected on the feast of first fruits, and he sent the set apart spirit on the feast of weeks. The practice of each of these spring festivals clearly depict the death and resurrection of Yahushua HaMashiach. So Yahushua is the Passover lamb of Yahuwah. He says, "Behold the Lamb of Yahuwah who takes away the sin of the world," according to John 1 verse 29 and 1 John 3 verse 4. So Yahushua is the unleavened bread of life. John 6 verse 35. And Yahushua said to them, "I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall not get hungry at all, and he who believes in me shall not get thirsty at all." Yahushua is the first fruits, but now Yahushua has been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who were asleep, according to 1 Corinthians 15 verse 20. Yahushua sent the set apart spirit on the festival of weeks, which is Pentecost, and when the day of Pentecost had come, they were all together in one place, and they were all filled with the set apart spirit, according to Acts 2 verse 1 to 4. Because Yahushua's fulfillment of the spring festival is so exact, it seems reasonable that he will also fulfill the remaining fall festivals. How do we know that Yahuwah intended the appointed times to show his plan for salvation? One of the clues that indicates the Moedim have more significance than mere traditions and remembrance is found in Leviticus 23 verse 4. It says, "These are the appointed times of Elohim, set apart convocations, which you shall proclaim at the times appointed for them." Shaul provides the same conclusion when he refers to the Moedim as shadows of things to come, and states that the true substance belongs to Yahushua in Colossians 2 verse 16 to 17. "Therefore let no one act as your judge in regard to food or drink in respect of festival or new moon or Sabbath day, things which are mere shadow of what is to come, but the substance belongs to Yahushua." Passover pointed to Yahushua the Messiah as our Passover lamb, whose blood was shed for our sins. However, we should still perform the Passover. And what is the Passover? The event of sacrificing a lamb. So lamb sacrifice still exists. But can we perform it today? We can't perform because we don't have the resources available to us. So that's why we cannot perform the Passover today. And the Passover is the event of sacrificing the lamb, right? Lamb sacrifice before Yahushua, the purpose of lamb sacrifice was the shedding of the blood, and the shedding of the blood was for forgiveness of sins. But because of Yahushua now, the shedding of blood is no longer necessary from the lamb, right? Because Yahushua is now has paid the price, right? He has shed blood for us. So now the lamb doesn't have to shed blood now for our transgression. But the sacrifice of the lamb still exists, still continue, but the blood plays no role anymore. It no longer plays a role because Yahushua has fulfilled that role that the blood plays, right? But the sacrifice of the lamb, which is the Passover, still continues today, right? So if we have whatever it is that is available to us, that we can go to Jerusalem and perform it exactly as how the Most High instructed us how to be performed, with the Levite priest and the temple and the altar, and those things that we need in order to do it the way we're supposed to be doing it according to Yah's laws, then we can perform it. But today we cannot perform it because we no longer have the resources available for us to perform the Passover. And the Passover is the event of sacrificing the lamb. So unleavened bread pointed to the Messiah's sinless life. As leaven is a picture of sin in the scriptures, Yahushua fulfilled this festival. First fruits pointed to Messiah's resurrection as the first fruits of the righteous. 1 Corinthians 15 verse 20. Yahushua fulfilled this moed when he was risen. Pentecost represented Yahuwah pouring out his set-apart spirit on Yahushua's disciples. Acts 2 described the fulfillment of this moed. Trumpets represents Yahushua's return for his bride, where trumpets are blown and the elect are taken up. The atonement occurs 10 days after the festival of trumpets, when Yahuwah will judge his people. Tabernacles occurs 15 days after the festival of trumpets, when we celebrate the wedding festival. So these are what the appointed time represent. They represent prophetic events that's going to take place, on the earth. Those are Yah's appointed time. Those are his fixed days. That's why these prophetic events are going to take place on a fixed date. Matthew 24:42. Therefore, be on the alert, for you do not know which day your Elohim is coming. So we have to be on the alert, because these appointed times kind of give us an indication of when the return is going to be, because they're not just feast days that we just gather together and just have a good time. These are prophetic events. These are fixed dates, and Yahuwah's prophecies are also fixed dates. So Yahushua fulfilled the feast festivals to the letter. Following the patterns suggested by the fall festivals, it is highly probable that he will come to catch away his bride, fulfilling the festival of trumpets for 7 years during the tribulation, the days of awe, and will celebrate the marriage supper of the Lamb. He will then return to earth to judge and cleanse the people, fulfilling the day of atonement, and establish his kingdom on earth, fulfilling the festival of tabernacles. So each of these three fall festivals are due to be fulfilled in some historic and spectacular fashion, just as the earlier four festivals were. There is little doubt and epic events are due to occur on some future date. All three of these future events dates are scheduled by Yahuwah to erupt. So in conclusion, while those who say we need to keep the Moedim claim there is a blessing in doing so, we do not want to be led in error in the account of feelings and emotions and only see what we want to see, and especially while pursuing the desires and lusts of the heart in chasing after blessing, which is idolatry of the heart, are extremely overzealous for obedience to our Elohim. So we have to be very careful in what we do, in what we practice outside of Yah's laws, statutes, and commandments. Don't be too overzealous, right? To jump, to put the cart before the horse in wanting to perform these days that the Most High instructs us on how to perform it according to His ways, according to His laws. So, Passover lesson, you can download some articles from the Israelite Way website, israeliteway.com. Free download.html from our website, some articles regarding the Passover. So these are the 5 questions I posted earlier. I hope you have your answer ready, because the answer was presented during the lesson, and I hope you recognize what the answer is. So the first one is, what was the Passover in Egypt and how was it performed? The Passover in Egypt was lamb sacrifice, right? We sacrificed a lamb, which was a Passover, and we put the blood over our doorpost. So the lamb was the Passover. So the Passover started out as the event of sacrificing the lamb. So the second question, what was the Passover in the wilderness and how was it performed? The Passover in the wilderness was the event of sacrificing the lamb, because the lamb is the Passover. If there's no lamb, there's no Passover. Just like in Egypt, if there was no lamb, there will not be any Passover, right? So it's the same logic all the way through, that if there's no lamb, there's no Passover, right? So question number 3, what was the Passover when we were in our own land, and how was it performed? The Passover was the event of sacrificing a lamb. So the lamb is always the Passover, right? It has not changed one bit since Egypt. It's always been the Passover. The lamb is always the Passover, right? Number 4, what was the Passover after Yoshua's death and resurrection? How was it performed, right? Still continue on with the sacrificing of the lamb. The event of the sacrificing a lamb is the Passover, because the lamb is the Passover. Number 5, what was the Passover while we were in captivity outside our land, and how was it performed? We never performed a Passover outside of our land in captivity, right? We never did, right? Because the Passover is the event of sacrificing a lamb, and it also represents freedom, and it also represents us as a sovereign nation. We never did that in captivity outside of our land. We have never performed a Passover, our sacrifice, the event of sacrificing a lamb. We never did that outside of our land while we were in captivity. So this brings us to the end of this lesson presentation study. I hope you're able to get some understanding from this lesson presentation. If you're still on the fence or still need some more clarity, I encourage you to probably review it a second time. And if you have any questions, you could send your questions to gotquestions@israeliteway.org. gotquestions@israeliteway.org. And so we not saying that you cannot perform or participate in doing any of these appointed times. We just say that if you're gonna perform it, make sure you perform it Yah's way, because everything is not available to us, so we can perform it Yah's way, but we can respect it. We can we can recognize it, right? And we can honor it, right? That's all we can do for now. But to perform it, right, we don't have the resources available that we can perform all these appointment times according to how Yah instruct us how to perform it. So Israelite Way is not knocking against the appointed times. Israelite Way believe in all the appointed times, and Israelite Way believe that we should perform the appointed times Yah's way, not man's way. So if you have received the knowledge, understanding, and the importance of this lesson, and intend to study to show thyself approved, Allah Yahuwah, shake off your personal opinions, assumptions of Yahweh's word, and the vain traditions of man, and continue to seek the truth. May Yahweh guide and favor you with the belief and understanding that pertain to his word. So I leave you in peace as I come to you in peace with the Hebrew word of peace. Shalom, shalom, shalom.
I'm trying to give them the truth, now they say I preach.